This is your brother, General Abu Amin Arab. My brothers and sisters, I would like to take a few moments of your time to briefly explain to you the disagreement I had with a brother over the internet and Facebook a couple of days ago. This brother had written a brilliant essay. I mean, a very long essay, a mini book, and placed it on the internet for our advancement and understanding and enhancement. I wrote to the brother, this is beautiful, this is wonderful. It's unfortunate that all this information we need for our liberation will not be read by most black people because most black people detest reading. Let me explain what I mean. It doesn't mean that all black people don't love reading, but it means that many of us don't like reading, unless it's some fictional stuff or some lightweight stuff that they don't have to engage too deeply in because they don't like reading. I tried to explain to the brother that one reason we do not like reading is because our not liking to read derives in our chattel enslavement. When it was forbidden for us to read, and if you were caught reading, or if the master thought you could read or spell, you were given an atrocious beating in front of everybody else, all the other black people, so that they could learn why you got a beating and how they should keep away from that particular method you were utilizing that resulted in your beating. So black people, over time, forgot their names, forgot their culture, forgot everything because they could not read. Of course, a few could read. That's understandable. And some of us have loved book reading. Myself, I worship books. Books are my life outside of my family. Give me a book and you can pacify me, providing it's not fiction or some lightweight books, but something of substance. Where I can derive something that will enhance my understanding so that I can pass it on to you and my people and my family. So my brothers and sisters, I've tried to tell the brother that most of us detest reading, and if perhaps he could put it in another format, like a video, more people would read it. Black people would take the time to read it, listen to it, react to it. But in all of this wording, and this beautiful wording, this valuable information, black people were going to miss it because most black people don't like reading. And this is a carryover. This is a post-traumatic slave disease. Do you understand what I'm saying? Every one of us don't have it. Like every one of us don't have high blood pressure. High blood pressure is a post-traumatic slave disease. You know that? Of course, we assisted in our eating habits, but that's where it derives from. That's where the locus of its beginning is in chattel enslavement of us. So, I picked up a book entitled In Their Own Words, Negro History from 1619 to 1865. And in this book, there's a short essay put in here by Frederick Douglass. And let you listen to a witness, one who's involved in it, who knows what he is talking about, and not someone who was born yesterday or in the 21st century or the 20th century pretending they know what's happening. And because they love reading, they assume all black people love reading. This is not a fact. Sure, we read a lot of fiction and stuff. I read a lot of fiction, but then I outgrew fiction. I wanted to read the real stuff, the James Baldwin, even my brothers and sisters, Frantz Fanon, I wanted to know the truth, what was going on fundamentally. And if I knew something about it, I could change it perhaps. So my brothers and sisters, I have been reading all my life since I was about 4 or 5 years old. And I read until either I go blind or death takes me over. But to prove to the brother at this point that slaves were not allowed to read, and because they were not allowed to read, because if they were caught reading, they would suffer a devastating and atrocious beating by the master in front of their fellow slave people, which was very embarrassing. But we got the lesson not only to the slave who was caught reading, but to those who might have thought about reading. So they kept away from it. They drew to a point where they detested reading because reading brought pain to them. But let me share with you this little quotation here from this book, In Their Own Words, edited by Metzger, what Frederick Douglass had to say about it. This is an essay called The ABCs, 1845. Quote, very soon after I went to the masters, Mr. and Mrs. Abbott, she very kindly commenced to teach me the ABCs. After I had arrived and learned this, she assisted me in learning to spell words of 3 or 4 letters. Just at this point of my progress with her, Mr. All found out what was going on and at once forbid Mrs. All to instruct me further, telling her, among other things, that it was unlawful as well as unsafe to teach a slave to read. To use his words, his own words rather, and further he said, if you give a nigger an inch, he will take an ell. A nigger should know nothing but to obey his master, to do as he is told, and to do it. Learning would spoil the best niggers in the world. Now, he said, if you teach that nigger how to read, there would be no keeping him. It would forever unfit him to be a slave. He would at once become unmanageable and of no value as a slave. You see, as to himself, it could do him no good, but a great deal of harm. It would make him discontented and unhappy. These words sank deeply into my heart, stirred my sentiments. Within that lay slumbering and called into existence an entirely new train of thought. It was a new and special revelation explaining that dark and mysterious thing with which my youthful understanding had struggled, but struggled in vain. I now understand what had been to me a most perplexing difficulty, to wit, the white man's power to enslave the black man. It was a grand achievement, and I prized it highly. Unquote, Frederick Douglass. So see, there's confirmation that blacks were not allowed to read. And if they were caught reading, they were taught a lesson that would prevent them from desiring to read any longer. And consequently, they began to detest reading because reading led to too much pain for them. Now this trauma from not reading, not allowed to read a book, was passed on down through the generations. And one reason the white man can still read us is because of our lack of knowledge in reading and knowing our history and doing the research to confirm what we have read. Because we detest reading. And this situation and this problem is known as the PSTD, Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, PTSD, Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome. Now, not every African in the USA or descendant of the slaves suffers under the post-traumatic slave syndrome with the same issues and the same psycho illnesses that everyone else or the other one suffer with. We all have different ones because we all had strengths in certain areas, and only in the areas where we were weak, I had been conquered, did we submit to the master and the master's will. Some of us never submitted to the master's will, and we learned to read regardless of what the master said. But then we must admit, there were many of us, and there are still many of us, who would do anything, preferably in the learning category, except pick up a book and read it. Because those psychological vibes we receive from our ancestors, both culturally and through our blood, still encourages us to not read, because the white man does not like for us to learn to read or to be caught reading, or we would suffer a consequence. I didn't tell him every black person didn't like to read. He assumed that. He assumed that because, like most blacks, they don't want to learn from anybody else. They think they know it all already. You see, we all have all knowledge embedded within us. Everything that man, woman needs to know is already in each and every one of us in what I like to call an existential knowledge bank. But it's been covered with the pain and sufferings that the white man and the Arabs and others have inflicted upon us, all that darkness. But it's there in the subconscious, awaiting someone to shine a light on it, because you see, that's all we have to do for one another. We already know everything. It's just covered in darkness in the deepest depths of our minds. And all someone needs to do is give you a cue. And that cue shines light on every subject there is, not at once, but the subject at hand. And you see it in a moment. And the first thing you think is, my God, I knew that. Of course you knew that. But you see, it's all been covered up. And the white man taught us during slavery not to read, because reading was a light that shone on all this knowledge we have stored in our knowledge bank. And we are able to recognize it and act on it. Do you understand what I'm trying to say, my brothers and sisters? If you do, once again, peace and hotep to you. Love you.